All right, so welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to get experimental.
Oh, I like the sound of that.
Yeah, we're going to take a deep dive into experimental art techniques.
Okay.
We'll look at what they are, like why they even matter, and how appreciating them can actually help anyone unlock a bit more creative thinking, I think.
I think so too.
Yeah, I'm excited about this one.
Yeah, me too.
So our launchpad for this deep dive is an article from Irish Art Mart.
Okay.
They're an online art marketplace.
I see.
And they seem to be just as into pushing boundaries as, like, the artists that they actually feature.
Right.
So in this piece, they really highlight how moving beyond, the tried and true can lead to some seriously amazing discoveries in art.
And I think that's one of the key takeaways right there.
Yeah.
Experimentation.
As
At its core, it's about unlocking potential.
Uh-huh.
Whether that's an artist finding their own unique style or, all of us discovering new ways to shake up our thinking.
Yeah, that's a really great point. The article really drives home that experimentation isn't about, like, rejecting those traditional techniques.
Right.
It's more about expanding your options, finding your own voice, and pushing past those creative ruts we all find ourselves in from time to time.
It's almost like building up a muscle,
Right, interesting.
that creative muscle that helps you see new possibilities, new connections.
Uh-huh.
And just like any workout, sometimes you need to shake things up to see some real progress.
Yeah, that actually reminds me of something I've been dealing with recently.
Oh, really?
I've been trying to learn how to code.
Oh, wow.
And let me tell you, my brain feels like it's doing gymnastics,
I bet.
trying to, like, grasp these new concepts.
Yeah.
But what's really fascinating is how it's impacting the way I approach other things.
Oh, interesting.
Like problem solving at work or just, thinking through a challenge.
Right.
Like, my brain is building these new pathways, new ways of, like, connecting the dots. You know what I mean?
It's a perfect example of how venturing out of your comfort zone, even in a completely different field, can actually boost your creativity overall.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And speaking of breaking out of those comfort zones, the article dives into some really cool techniques.
Okay.
The first one they highlight is collage.
Oh, collage.
Right, probably takes us all back to kindergarten, right?
Right.
But the article emphasizes that collage at a higher level is so much more than just gluing things down.
It absolutely is.
Right.
Think about the complexity of layering,
Yeah.
the subtle nuances of composition, the way that artists can actually create these unexpected dialogues between materials.
Uh-huh.
They even talk about how Picasso and Braque used collage in the early 20th century
Wow.
to revolutionize the art world.
That's where it gets really interesting, right? Because
Yeah.
we often think of collage as, like, the simple craft.
Uh-huh.
But those artists were using it to fracture perspectives,
Right.
challenge traditional representations of space,
Yeah.
and even introduce, like, everyday objects into this fine art realm.
It's a perfect example of how a seemingly simple technique can be elevated to create something truly groundbreaking.
Yes.
And what's interesting is that, we all engage in a form of collage in our daily lives.
Ooh, that's interesting.
Think about creating a mood board for a project.
Right.
Or curating your Pinterest feed.
Okay, yeah,
Even putting together an outfit.
totally.
It's all about combining these different elements
Mm-hmm.
to express an idea or tell a story.
Okay, I love that. It makes those, like, fine art concepts feel so much more relatable.
Right.
And, while we're on the topic of combining things, the article gets really exciting when it dives into mixed media.
Mixed media, yeah.
What is it about this approach that, like, gets artists so fired up?
Well, imagine the possibilities when you start combining different artistic mediums,
Mhm.
like the way that the textures of acrylics play against charcoal,
Mm.
or how fabric scraps can introduce a completely different dimension to a piece with etched elements.
Okay.
The article even mentioned how sometimes the most exciting parts of mixed media come from those unexpected interactions between materials.
It's like those happy accidents
Right.
that lead to something totally unique and beautiful.
Exactly.
I'm suddenly envisioning some abstract masterpiece made entirely of recycled bottle caps and dried flower petals.
That's the spirit.
I know.
It really speaks to the power of experimentation to unlock those hidden gems of creativity.
Totally.
And that brings us to another aspect the article touched upon, which is using unconventional materials in art.
Yes.
Who says you need a canvas and paintbrushes to create something amazing?
Right. Yeah.
The article mentioned a whole range of materials that artists are incorporating into their work. Found objects, recycled materials, things you might find just walking down the street.
I know. It's like the entire world becomes your art supply store.
Yes, exactly. And that's what's so fascinating. Think about, like, the incredible textures that you can find in nature.
Uh-huh.
The smooth, worn surface of a piece of driftwood,
Yeah.
the delicate patterns of a fallen leaf.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Suddenly, these everyday items become charged with artistic potential.
It makes you think about artists like Joseph Cornell,
Yes,
who used those unconventional materials to create something truly special.
absolutely.
His shadow boxes, with their intricate arrangements of found objects, were like tiny windows into these dreamlike worlds.
I love that description.
Yeah. He transformed those everyday items into these thought-provoking, almost poetic compositions.
He was a master at finding beauty in the overlooked.
Right.
And that's something I think is the heart of experimental art.
Right.
It's about seeing the world with fresh eyes, finding inspiration in the unexpected, and pushing the boundaries of what art can even be.
It's like a challenge to ourselves, isn't it? Like, how can I use this seemingly ordinary object to create something extraordinary?
Absolutely.
It almost feels like problem solving, but with a creative twist.
I love that way of looking at it.
Right.
And speaking of pushing boundaries,
Yeah.
we can't forget about digital art in this conversation.
Right. Now, I know some people might be hesitant to call digital art experimental,
Yeah.
but the article makes a really great point about how these digital tools are actually helping artists break new ground and create things that traditional methods just couldn't.
Exactly. Digital art isn't about, like, replacing traditional techniques.
Right.
It's about expanding the artist's toolkit and opening up a whole new realm of possibilities.
It's mind-blowing to think about what artists are doing with technology these days. And it makes me wonder, even beyond the art world, like, how has technology impacted your own creative process, or even the way you approach, like, problem solving in your everyday life?
That's a great question to consider.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, this deep dive isn't just about art for art's sake.
Right.
It's about fostering this mindset of experimentation that can benefit us in all areas of life.
That's
But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's dive deeper into some specific examples of these experimental techniques.
Yes, let's do it.
And how they're being used to create some truly innovative art.
I'm all for that. Let's take a closer look at how these unconventional approaches are shaping the art world and maybe even inspiring us to be a little more experimental in our own lives.
Sounds good.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of experimental art.
Yes.
We've been exploring how artists are pushing those boundaries of what's possible,
Yeah.
using everything from like recycled bottle caps to digital algorithms as their creative tools.
That's pretty amazing.
It's been really eye-opening.
Absolutely. What I find so fascinating is that by, like, challenging the traditional norms of art making,
Yeah.
they're also challenging, like, our own perceptions of what art can be.
Right.
It's like they're asking us to look closer to see the beauty and the potential and the unexpected.
As we were talking in that last segment about using unconventional materials,
Yeah.
it made me think, when we talk about like breaking the rules in art, what rules are we even talking about?
That's a great question, because in the world of experimental art, those rules are constantly being redefined.
Right.
It's less about breaking existing rules and more about realizing that maybe there weren't any hard and fast rules to begin with.
So it's more about expanding our definition of what art can be, who can create it, and what materials can be used to express those creative ideas.
Exactly. It's about, like, pushing those boundaries and seeing what happens when we step outside of our comfort zones, both as artists and as viewers.
It's about embracing the unexpected, the unconventional, and even the seemingly mundane, and finding the artistic potential within those things, right?
Precisely. Remember when we were talking about those unconventional materials, everything from, like, recycled plastic to natural elements? The article had some incredible examples of artists who are using those materials to create truly innovative works.
I know, it's like the whole world becomes your art supply store. I was particularly struck by their mention of artists using things like sand, leaves, even ice in their work.
Oh, wow.
It's like they're collaborating with nature itself.
It is.
Yeah.
Think about the textures, the colors, the way light interacts with those materials. A crumpled piece of aluminum foil can suddenly become a study in light and shadow.
Right.
A pile of, like, discarded bottle caps
Mm-hmm.
transforms into this vibrant, three-dimensional mosaic.
It reminds me of the artist Andy Goldsworthy.
Oh, yeah.
And the incredible sculptures he creates using only natural materials that he finds in the environment.
Beautiful.
His works are so ephemeral,
Yes.
so connected to the landscape and the changing seasons.
It's fascinating. What's fascinating about Goldsworthy's work is that it challenges our traditional notion of permanence in art.
Mm.
It forces us to appreciate the beauty of the fleeting moment, the ever-changing nature of our world.
And it reminds us that art doesn't have to be confined to, like, a museum or a gallery. It can exist anywhere, even in the most unexpected places.
It's like he's saying, look closer, pay attention to the beauty that's all around you, even in the ordinary, even in the things we might typically overlook. And that brings us back to something we talked about earlier, how engaging with experimental art can make us more observant, more attuned to the world around us.
It's like a reminder to tap into that childlike sense of wonder and curiosity that we often lose as we get older.
Right.
Experimental art gives us permission to play, to experiment, to ask what if without worrying about the outcome.
And that sense of playfulness is so important, not just in art, but in life in general. It allows us to be more open to new ideas, more adaptable to change, and more resilient when faced with challenges.
I love that. It's not just about creating pretty pictures or sculptures. It's about cultivating a mindset that can benefit us in all areas of our lives.
Exactly. And that leads us to another key aspect of experimental art that the Irish Art Mart article touched on, the concept of process over product.
Ooh, that's interesting. Tell me more about that.
Well, in traditional art forms, there's often a strong focus on the final product, like the finished masterpiece. But in experimental art, the process of creation is just as important,
Okay.
if not more so.
So it's less about striving for perfection and more about embracing the unexpected twists and turns that the creative process throws at you.
Exactly. And that can be a really liberating experience, both for the artist and for the viewer.
Mm.
It allows us to, let go of the need to control every aspect of the outcome
Right.
and to find beauty and meaning in imperfection.
That actually reminds me of a conversation I had recently with a musician friend.
Oh, really?
They were telling me how they were experimenting with new sounds and recording techniques,
Uh-huh.
and they said something that really stuck with me.
Okay.
They said, sometimes the mistakes are where the magic happens.
I love that. It speaks to the idea that in those moments of unexpected deviation from the plan, we often discover something new and exciting that we wouldn't have found if we had stuck rigidly to our original vision.
It's like Bob Ross always said, there are no mistakes, only happy accidents.
And it makes me wonder, how often do we stifle our own creativity by being afraid to make those mistakes, those deviations from the norm?
It's like we're so conditioned to strive for perfection that we forget to allow ourselves the freedom to simply play, explore, and see what happens.
You've hit the nail on the head. We live in a culture that often values perfection and conformity over creative exploration, but experimental art gives us permission to let go of those fears and to explore the unknown without judgment.
It's about giving ourselves permission to be curious, to play, to make a mess, and to see what emerges from the chaos. Who knows? Maybe we'll stumble upon something brilliant along the way.
And even if we don't create a masterpiece, the very act of experimenting, of pushing ourselves outside of our comfort zones, is a valuable experience in itself.
Yeah.
It stretches our creative muscles, expands our perspectives, and helps us see the world in new and exciting ways.
This has been such a stimulating conversation. I feel like my brain is doing a happy dance right now. But before we get too carried away, I think it's time to wrap up part 2 of our deep dive.
Indeed. And as we move into our final segment, I'd like to leave our listeners with a question to ponder. Think about a time in your life when you embraced the unexpected,
Okay.
when you stepped outside of your comfort zone and tried something new. What did you learn from that experience? How did it change your perspective?
Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into experimental art. I don't know about you, but I'm feeling energized by all the creative possibilities we've uncovered. That question we left you with, reflecting on times we've embraced the unexpected in our own lives, has really got me thinking.
It's amazing how those personal experiments can be such powerful learning experiences.
Yeah.
They remind us that this spirit of creative exploration isn't limited to the art world.
Right.
It's something we can all tap into.
So true. And speaking of connecting art to other aspects of life, something you mentioned earlier really piqued my curiosity. The link between experimental art and innovation.
Oh, yeah.
Can you pack that a bit more for us?
Well, think about the core elements of innovation.
Okay.
Challenging assumptions, breaking down traditional barriers, thinking outside the box.
Hmm.
These are all skills that experimental artists employ in their work every single day.
So are you saying that engaging with experimental art can actually make us more innovative in other areas of our lives?
Absolutely. By exposing ourselves to unconventional ideas, materials, and approaches, we're essentially expanding our mental toolbox,
Right.
giving ourselves more options to draw from when faced with a challenge.
It's like that saying, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Right.
But if you have a whole array of tools at your disposal, you can approach problems with more creativity and flexibility.
Precisely. Experimental art helps us build that diverse toolkit by encouraging us to question assumptions, see connections between seemingly unrelated things, and even view potential failures as opportunities for growth.
That last point is so important, I think. We live in a world that often emphasizes, perfection and can make us afraid to take risks. But experimental art reminds us that those so-called failures are often the stepping stones to something truly innovative.
It's about embracing that fail fast, fail forward mentality.
I like that.
Remember how the Irish Art Mart article highlighted that the art world is constantly evolving, and those who embrace experimentation are often leading those changes?
That really stuck with me too. It's like they're saying that if you want to truly innovate, you need to be willing to experiment, push boundaries, and venture into the unknown, even if it means stumbling along the way.
And that takes a certain level of courage, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It means being willing to risk criticism and potentially fail in the eyes of others. But the rewards of that creative risk-taking can be incredibly powerful.
I think it's also important to acknowledge the impact of experimental art beyond the individual level. It's not just about personal growth. It's about the potential for societal impact, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely.
Hmm.
Experimental art can be a powerful catalyst for social change.
Yeah.
It challenges norms,
Wow.
sparks important conversations, and encourages us to reimagine the world around us.
Think about movements like Dadaism or Surrealism.
Yes.
They used art to question authority, expose the absurdity of war, and explore the complexities of the human psyche.
Right.
They weren't afraid to shake things up.
Those artists were true pioneers, using their creativity to hold a mirror up to society,
Right.
reflecting back both its beauty and its flaws. And that's something that experimental art continues to do today.
It's amazing how art can have that power to challenge us, inspire us, and ultimately push us to grow both individually and as a society.
It's truly remarkable.
Well, as we come to the end of our deep dive, I hope our listeners are feeling inspired to embrace the spirit of experimentation in their own lives. Whether that's exploring a new art technique, trying a different approach to problem solving at work, or simply being more open to new experiences, the key is to cultivate that curiosity and a willingness to step outside your comfort zone.
The journey is just as important as the destination.
Hmm.
Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Embrace those happy accidents and see where your creative spirit leads you.
And that, my friends, brings our deep dive into the world of experimental art to a close. We hope you've enjoyed the journey as much as we have.
Until next time, keep those creative sparks flying.